Good morning, extended school year students. This morning in writing class, you have been watching some videos introducing us to the concept of figurative language, which is something you have certainly heard of in language arts class, but we're going to go over it a little more detailed. So to begin with, what is figurative language? Well, figurative language, sometimes called figures of speech, includes words or phrases, either spoken or written, that mean something different than the individual words might indicate. Each kind of figurative language has unique characteristics. And then this part right here, we're going to do this a little bit as we go through the week, but we're not going to do this right now. Right here in the speech bubbles, it says, why do people use figures of speech? And the response right here is to add depth, special effects, and imagery to the messages that they convey. So think about it. If you were reading a book and every sentence was written in just a literal way, just this is what happened and this is why, and you didn't feel like the author had any style, wasn't using any devices, I have to imagine that would be very boring. So let's look at this. Literal versus figurative language. In literal language, you say exactly what you mean. If it's cold outside, I'm going to say, it's cold outside. In figurative language, you don't say exactly what you mean. You compare, exaggerate, or understate the situation. So I might say, it's as cold as Alaska out there on a summer day that's a little chillier than usual. Well, that definitely wouldn't be true because it's a lot colder than that in Alaska. The cool thing about figurative language is that it uses your prior knowledge to help develop connections between unfamiliar things. So, like I said in the last example about Alaska, I was banking on you knowing that Alaska is generally considered a very cold place. Why do authors use figurative language? Figurative language helps to paint a picture in the reader's mind, which makes reading a whole lot less boring. Figurative language also stirs the reader's imagination. It brings out emotions and understandings that literal language does not. And it keeps you interested in reading. I think you're going to start seeing a lot now when you're reading books that figurative language makes the book a lot more interesting. It helps you start to think about those comparisons. And I know for me, if I was reading a book and they were making a comparison and I didn't really understand it, I would probably go look it up and try to understand it. So let's practice some, okay? Let's try to decide, are these literal or are these figurative? And we will keep track over here on the right side, okay? So number 1, Grant always turns in his homework. I would have to say that's literal. He turns in his homework every day, probably has an A. So we'll give that a literal. Number 2, when she sings, her voice is like velvet. Well, can a voice really be like velvet? Velvet is a type of material. I think this indicates that her voice sounded smooth, but there's also this word here, like, which is a hint. We're going to learn more about that. So when she sings, her voice is like velvet. I would have to say that is figurative. Because a voice can't really be velvet. Number 3, the water was rising in the river because of the rain. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Rain would make a river rise. So let's go with literal. Number 4, half of the class did not complete the assignment. Well, I think that we're going to all agree that this is, again, literal. Half, that's not an unreasonable number. I'm sure that happens sometimes where half the class doesn't complete an assignment. Not this class, of course. Number 5, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. We've probably even said this before. Nobody's going to eat an entire horse. That is not possible. So we will label that, oops, let's fix that, as figurative. Number 6, Mike was so angry that steam was coming out of his ears. Well, has steam ever come out of your ears when you're angry? It might have felt like it because you get hot and mad. However, that's not really possible, but it does put a lot of imagery in our head. So we have to go with figurative. Number 7. The zebras cried when the wise old elephant died. So that's a tricky one. A zebra could certainly cry if in pain and whatnot, but I don't know that they would be crying in reaction to an elephant death. It sounds like maybe this would be in a story about animals where the animals are personified. Regardless, I think we could label it as literal. Finally, number 8. I've told you a million times to clean up your room. Well, even if you've told somebody a lot of times to clean up their room, you probably didn't do it a million. That word million is probably a little bit of an exaggeration. So we would label this as figurative. So the second video you watched was about similes in pop culture. Had a lot of famous song lyrics, movie quotes in it. So a simile is a comparison of two things using the words like or as. A comparison of two things using the words like or as. So this is very important because there is a similar figure of speech called a metaphor, which we will talk about tomorrow. And there's a key difference between metaphors and similes. And that key difference is these words, like and as. So make sure you make a note of that. Here's a couple examples below. As sweet as pie. Colorful like crayons. Here's a couple more examples. She swims like a fish. He's as hairy as a gorilla. Let's actually mark those keywords. Like a fish, as a gorilla. Peter laughs like a hyena. Mr. John is as wise as an owl. Allow me, it's as easy as ABC. Because I was embarrassed, my face was as red as a ripe tomato. My love is like a red, red rose. The world is like a stage. She got a neck like a pipe. So we can see those are comparisons, and they're to things that we know about. So for independent practice today, this is the worksheet you are going to be doing. You have access to this in different ways depending on your needs. So you may have it digital or you may have a hard copy. Also, if you have it digital, but you would prefer to write your answers on a separate sheet of paper, take a picture and send that to me, that is absolutely fine. I am totally flexible. So let's just go over what you have to do in this worksheet. So it says, what are similes? And we just learned similes make comparisons using the words like or as. So let's read the directions starting right here. Similes are used to compare two things that are different in most ways, but are the same in one important way. The words like and as are used to compare the two things. Authors use similes to make their writing more interesting and descriptive, which we are all grateful for as readers. Examples: Lucy sings like a bird. Sam's raincoat was as yellow as a lemon. All right, part A. Part A says, read each simile, then write the two words that are being compared in the blanks. So let's do number 1 together in part A. Part A, number 1. Maria was as graceful as a swan. What two words are being compared here? I would say the words graceful and swan. Remember, that would go here and here on your worksheet. Because we know what a swan looks like. It's very beautiful. It does land and take off in a certain way that looks gentle, like it's easy for them. They have very long necks, like a ballerina may have. And we think of that as graceful. So that is why that comparison is being used. You're going to try this on your own for numbers 2 through 8. And then you're going to do part B. So let's look at B. Number 1. This is awesome because they gave you this handy dandy word bank here. And I think that's going to make this super easy for you. So you're going to pick a word from the bank that makes sense with the simile that they're trying to make. So number 1 in part B, and anybody that had me last year, you know I really like number 1. Number 1 says, the dog was as black as... Well, I go over to the list and I see my options are thunder, marshmallows, turtle, boats, coal, ice cream, or sun. And in this context, I have to say the word that I think makes most sense would be coal. So I know some of you are still getting to know me, but my dog is all black and his name is Cole, although I spell it like this. Because these are homophones, which means they sound the same, but they are spelled different. Fun fact. All right, you're going to finish this worksheet. You're going to get it to me in the best way possible for you. As I said, I'm super flexible. And tomorrow we will pick up from here. Have a great rest of your day.